Hello everyone, this is Kevin Cofield with Cofield Aviation. In this YouTube video, we're going to discuss the airworthiness requirement. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know how I can possibly do anything better, or if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. The airworthiness requirements kind of focus on everything with the airplane as far as documents wise, required inspections that have to be done to keep the airplane an airworthy matter. You know, we kind of focus in on the PAVE checklist a lot for aeronautical decision making, risk management wise. And the P stands for pilot, A stands for airplane, V stands for environment, and E stands for external pressure. So the A, the airplane, that's kind of what airworthiness requirements focus in on. So airplane in the PAVE checklist would be airworthiness requirements, would be operation of systems, and performance and limitations. So let's go ahead and get started with the airworthiness requirement. So I'm here on the Cofield Aviation website. So it's cofieldaviation.com. And if you just go here to the student section and then click on downloads, this is where I have all of these PDF files where you can download them, print them out. If you want to print them out and make notes throughout these videos, have at it. But cofieldaviation.com, student section, and then they're right here in the pre-solo documents. And here is airworthiness requirements. There it is. So let's get started. All right. So how we kind of break this down is the required documents to be on board the aircraft. I do the same thing with, pilot qualifications where it's, you have to have your pilot certificate, medical, photo ID when you're acting as PIC. And on the airplane, you have to have these documents. And AERO is the way that we can remember this with the acronym. So A stands for the Airworthiness Certificate. R will stand for the registration certificate. The other R is a radio station license. So this radio station license, though, that is FCC only. I'm sorry, that's international only. It's by the FCC, Federal Communication Commission, is who has that regulation, and where you would get that if you needed it. But that's only international, so we're not going to really discuss that because we're just doing domestic flying and most. But if you want to go to Canada, Bahamas, or whatever, get you a radio station license through the FCC. Owner's manual / approved flight manual / pilot's operating handbook, or POH. It's basically the operating limitations and information for your aircraft. And then the weight and balance data. So this weight and balance data is aircraft specific, the specific empty weight and moment of the aircraft. So we're going to break each one of these documents down. Biggest majority of is going to be airworthiness certificate here, but we're going to break each one of these aero documents down. All right, so airworthiness certificate registration, owner's manual / AFM / POH, weight and balance data. All right, so let's break down this airworthiness certificate. All of these are seen here in 9149, 91411, 91413, 91207 is where all of these regulations are found. Now, the cool thing here about the airworthiness certificate, just like your private pilot certificate, is it never expires. All right. Now, there are required inspections, though, that we have to do to keep that airworthiness certificate valid and thus the airplane airworthy. AV8 is the best way to remember this. Acronyms galore, right, in aviation. A stands for the annual inspection. So every 12 months, you have to have an annual inspection. An IA can sign off the annual. So an IA is an inspector authorization. An A&P mechanic can do the work. Now, an A&P mechanic, A stands for airframe, P stands for power plant. So airframe and power plant mechanic can do the work, but an IA has to sign off the annual. So an IA is kind of like an additional training where they have the authority to sign off the annual. They are the responsible person, if you will, for the annual inspection. The annual inspection does comply with a 100-hour inspection, which is what we'll talk about in just a second, which is that one right there. But annual inspection every 12 months, pretty simple there. V stands for the VOR check. So that's every 30 days. That's IFR only, found in 91-171 is where that regulation is found. So that's just IFR only. We won't cover that for the VFR guys. But VOR checks, dual VOR checks, if you're having to do like ground-based checks, VOTs, or even airborne checks, remember to look in your chart supplement to find where you can do that and what frequencies and stuff. The one here is a 100-hour inspection. So the 100-hour inspection is only required if used for hire. And here is the term for hire. We're going to break it down and kind of explain it a little bit. But the 100-hour inspection is due every 100 hours, all right? The regs don't necessarily specify if that's hops time or tack time, so take the lesser of those, the lesser of those, and just go by the tack time on the engine, every 100-hour tack time. You can go 10 hours over that, but only if you're en route to maintenance. So you can't just go over that over and over and over as you want, only if you were en route going to get that 100-hour inspection. And that extra time does not count for the next inspection. So if you go over, let's just say you go over, 5 hours. So the 100-hour inspection was done 105 hours from the last time. The next 100-hour would be due in 95 hours. So they don't give you any extra credit there. So an A&P mechanic can do the work and sign it off. But the big thing here is it does not count as an annual. Annual counts for 100-hour, but the 100-hour does not count as an annual inspection. But the A&P mechanic, he can sign off 100-hour. You don't have to have an IA for the 100-hour. So for hire, let's talk about this for just a second. For hire refers to the person, not the aircraft. All right, so a flight school providing the CFI and the airplane means it's for hire. So if you're writing one check for the airplane and the pilot, that would be for hire. A 100-hour would be required. A flight instructor providing flight instruction in his own aircraft would mean for hire. If it's a student-owned aircraft, all right, that is not for hire. So if you own the aircraft and you just hire the CFI to teach you in it or whatever, then that is not for hire. You would not need a 100-hour inspection for that. Or if you rent the airplane, all right, if you rent the airplane, then that would not require a 100-hour inspection. So let's just say if you rented a club's airplane or you rented the flight school's airplane or whatever, so you are responsible. If you're renting it, you're leasing it, that means you own the airplane while you're leasing it, all right? So think about when you're renting or when you're leasing an airplane, you own that airplane. You are responsible for it, right? If you prop strike or whatever, you are responsible for that airplane, okay? So if you rent the airplane and then you hire your own CFI to teach you in it, then that would not require a 100-hour inspection. Most people think, well, you're renting the airplane, so it requires 100-hour. No, if you're just personally renting it, then it does not require 100-hour because rent lease means that you own it. However, if you're renting the airplane from the owner and they're providing the pilot the flight instruction, basically, then that is for hire, and 100-hour would need to be 100-hour would be required. So that gets a little bit confusing, right? But for hire refers to the person, not the aircraft. So basically, if you're cutting one check, then that's for hire. And then in Part 91, For hire is specifically not allowed because that's on-demand charter operations, except for basically the scenario of the pilot providing flight instruction in his own aircraft. Then a 100-hour inspection would be required. So, like for instance, in the flight school, I'm part owner in the aircraft, and I'm providing a flight school employee to be in the airplane. So in that standpoint, the student pays one check. That one check pays for the airplane and the pilot. So that's why our flight school aircraft have to have a 100-hour inspection. Okay. The other A here is the altimeter pedal static check. You'll learn all about the pedal static system and operation of systems. Every 24 calendar months, the altimeter and pedal static check is due. It's only required to fly IFR, so instrument flight rules. IMC is instrument meteorological conditions. So you have to have a pedal static check to fly IFR. It's not required for VFR, and that is found in 91.411. The transponder, the T, stands here for transponder. So transponder is also every 24 months. It's only required if flying in airspace in which a transponder / ADS-B out is required. So see that National Airspace System video to dig into when a transponder is required. And that is 91.413 is where that is. So most of the time people do this at the same time. Get a 411 and 413 check done, gets the pedal static check out of the way, and the transponder, since they're due at the same time. So most avionics shops can do that for you. The E, last one here, is the ELT. So the ELT is emergency locator transmitter. It's basically what goes off if you was to have an accident. But every 12 months is when the ELT has to be inspected. The battery is required to be replaced at half the battery life, and if it's been used for more than 1 cumulative hour, meaning if it's been on. So if you get to the airplane and it's on, the only way you can know it's on is, some of them have an external buzzer, but the small GA airplanes, most of them, you're only going to know that if you tune in 121.5, which is actually, so 121.5 is emergency frequency. It's also a great way to remember this ELT inspections. So if you look right here, you've got 121.5. So you've got the, if you put a slash after the 2 and a slash after the 1, you get 12/1/0.5. And that's a good way to remember it. The 12 months, 1 cumulative hours got to replace, and 0.5 or half the battery life. So that 121.5 is a good way to remember when the ELT has to be replaced. And that's found in 91.207. And guess what? It's not always required. So go to 91.207 to determine when an ELT is actually required. One little caveat with the ELT, this kind of falls into like survival equipment, emergency equipment, or whatever, which an ELT is an emergency equipment. The most small general aviation airplanes have the old ELT that literally all it does is send a signal over 121.5. The newer airplanes, the jets and stuff that I fly, we have a 406 megahertz ELT, which means it sends a signal through satellite. So it pinpoints exactly where you are. The 406 does. The what's in most general aviation aircraft, the small airplanes, is just a signal, and it does not pinpoint your location. It is very hard to actually pinpoint your location. So keep that in mind. If you are doing any sort of remote flying, then please go on Amazon, whatever, buy one of those personal locator devices. They're cheap, and that's satellite based, and you can, I don't know if they have SOS buttons or whatever, but you can push that and boom, satellite. They'll know exactly where you are and that you are in trouble. Do not rely on this old ELT, please. Okay. Also, as an addition right here, we'll scroll down, consider C and E. So C would be a compass deviation card. Now, this is no longer required as long as the compass is not more than 10 degrees off. This is kind of a new change here, but most airplanes you will fly, you will see a compass deviation card next to the magnetic compass. And then E, this is still required though. E is an external data plate. All right, so if the newer airplanes have it stamped on the back, the older ones, your data plate's probably inside the pilot's side door. However, there should still be an external means way to identify the aircraft. So serial number, model number, type certificate number that the airplane was certified in, or whatever. So consider C&E here, compass deviation card, external data plate, but AV8 is the way to remember this. A is for annual, V, VOR check, annual inspections every 12 months, VOR check every day, IFR only, 100 hour if it's required every 100 hours. The annual counts for the 100 hour. The 100 hour does not count for the annual. The other A is the pedostatic altimeter check. The T is a transponder check every 24, both the pedostatic altimeter check, transponder check are every 24 months. ELT is every 12 months. So usually ELT gets done at the same time the annual inspection. And remember that 121.5 for 12 months, 1 cumulative hour and half the battery life, and then C&E. All right, let's move on here. Next thing we're going to talk about are good old airworthiness directives. So what are airworthiness directives? The way I want you to remember this is it's like a recall on a car. That's the easiest way to remember it. They're usually written in blood, right? So, something happens, an accident happens, or it's a bad part, or something that is very dangerous. The FAA will issue an airworthiness directive to ensure that you fix it. So if you don't fix it, then the airplane is not worthy. It's airworthy. It's the same thing as not doing an annual inspection or whatever. There are 3 types of airworthiness directives. So one is a one-time AD. That just means that the FAA issues it one time and you comply with it and you're done. All right, you keep the record of it. It was complied with, or it was not applicable. Sometimes your serial number it may not be applicable to your specific airplane. So you would, your AI at your annual will say, hey, it's not applicable because of serial number or whatever. The second AD is a recurring AD. So recurring AD is recurring all the time. So it's not just a one and done thing. There are 2 recurring ADs on our Cessna 172 Mike model is the seat track inspection. That's every 100 hours. And then also the ignition switch. So the Bendix ignition switch has to be checked every 100 hours. So even if you're flying an aircraft that doesn't require a 100-hour inspection, so you own your own aircraft or you're flying the club's aircraft or whatever, and that airplane doesn't need a 100-hour inspection, make sure, because if you fly your own airplane 200 hours a year, at 100 hours, you still got to comply with that recurring AD or else the airplane is not airworthy. So make sure that if you own your own airplane, you're keeping up with your flight time, even though you don't require a 100-hour. You might have a recurrent AD that is required. Most of those ADs, mechanic has to do. Now the Bendix switch one, actually, the 172 Mike, a pilot can actually perform that AD, but all of that is outlined in the actual airworthiness directive itself. But the last one here is emergency AD. So think like the Boeing 737 Max when they're grounded at all. That would be like an emergency AD. So something really bad has happened, and that's pretty much immediate. Now, most of the time when they do these airworthiness directives, they give you a compliance window. So depending upon the severity of the case, right? They might say comply with it at the next routine inspection. So it might be like annual inspection or whatever, or they might say, hey, you've got so many flight hours to comply with it or whatever. So it can be all across the board. It's whatever the AD says in there. Now, where do we find these ADs? So if you'll look right here, you can locate them on the FAA website. I have a link right there where we can pull up the airworthiness directives. So I'm just going to actually just do that real quick so I can show you how you do this. One cool thing about this as well is you can actually sign up for email. So if you look right here, you can click that. You can sign up for email deliveries of ADs. So I do that all the aircraft that I fly. That way, if the FAA issues an AD, you're immediately notified. Especially if it's an emergency AD or something of that case. But here's where you would go to look up your ADs. Now, I'm going to go back to the slide here. Now, when you're looking up ADs, that airplane is basically composed of more or less 3 different components. So you have the airframe, you have the power plant, and then you have the propeller. All right, and then some people also will say in the last you have appliances. So like all the other stuff in the airplane, avionics, or whatever. But the main components are the propeller, the airframe, and the power plant. So when you're looking up ADs, you got to look up ADs for all 3 of those. All right. So airframe, so like Cessna Textron is the one that made the airframe. So you would look up ADs for your specific model number in the for the airframe. The power plant, so either Lycoming or Continental or whatever, you would look up the ADs for that specific model engine, and then you would look up the ADs for the prop. So Macaulay or whatever prop that you have, you would look up on the website that those ADs. So it is the pilot in command responsibility to make sure the ADs are complied with. Right? So do sign up for those emails. I think that's a great way to get those. Give you a little bit of backstory, so kind of how ADs come about. So usually they come after the manufacturer has issued a service bulletin. So what is a service bulletin? So service bulletins are issued by the manufacturer, and they may or may not be mandatory. All right, but regardless, if so let's just say there's an issue with a part or whatever, then Textron's responsibility, who made the airframe, or Lycoming if it's the engine or whatever, it's their responsibility to keep up with that and any dangers or whatever. And they will issue a service bulletin out to all the owners of the aircraft and go, hey, this part has failed or has a bad batch, and within the next 15 hours of service, you need to inspect this part, make sure that you don't have this part number or blah 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 blah, whatever. Okay, but even if they make that a mandatory service bulletin, you don't have to comply with it. There is no regulatory requirement to comply with the manufacturer service bulletin. And it's not like the manufacturer can fine you or take away your pilot certificate or put you in jail or do anything if you don't comply. Now, obviously, in the interest of safety, yeah, we should be complying with service bulletins. But what the FAA does is then takes that service bulletin and they put their stamp of authority and approval. They're a government agency. They're regulatory in nature. Then they put their regulatory stamp on it, and they make it an airworthiness directive. And then once it becomes an airworthiness directive, that is mandatory to comply with. All right, it's like a recall on a car. Now, if you don't comply with the airworthiness directive, the airplane is not airworthy. So it's obviously you have to comply with the AD. So that's the ADs, the 3 types of ADs: a one-time, recurring, emergency. Make sure if you've got those recurring ADs that you're keeping up with those times, and all your mechanics should be putting in there the recurrent, saying this is a recurrent, this is when it was done, complied with, this is when it's due next. A lot of these a good mechanic, the IAs, will be printing off airworthiness directive. They're using the software to print off where everything's been complied with, all the one-time ADs. The airframe that we operate was in 1975. So there have been quite a few of ADs on the Textron airframe. Not so much in the engines. Engines are being replaced much sooner than that. Props the same thing. But anyway, so that is airworthiness directive. So do sign up for those emails for the aircraft that you're flying. Now, what do we do if the airplane falls outside the inspection windows? So let's just say the it's out of annual, or it's out of an AD, or it's out of whatever. The airplane is not airworthy, right? So how do we go about flying that airplane? The only way that we can do that, legally, is the special flight permit. So think about it in this perspective, right? So the annual inspection is every 12 calendar months. So let's just say, January 15th of 2024 is when your annual signed off. It's not due again. It's still good. January, the end of January, January 31st of 2025. But February the 1st of 2025, the airplane is not airworthy. Okay. So let's just say bad weather happens. You were supposed to fly it to your mechanic, and it rolls around February the 1st, and it's still sitting there, and February the 1st is a beautiful day, and you want to fly it down to your mechanic. Now, do you think if you went out and did a pre-flight that the airplane was probably airworthy? Yeah, probably so. From a pre-flight perspective, yeah, probably so. But paperwork-wise, because it's out of annual, even if it's one day, it is out of annual inspection, so it is not airworthy. So you have to get a special flight permit. Where can you do that? Is you can obtain that from your FSDO. So FSDO is a flight standards district office. Just call up the FAA, go, hey, I need a special flight permit. They do it all the time. They will issue it. It's like a one-time issue. It might be, hey, you can only fly during the day, no passengers, don't fly over populated areas, blah, blah, blah. There may be a requirement that a mechanic might have to sign off on something, but whatever, maybe not. It's whatever the FAA inspector issues there for that flight special flight permit. And then with that permit in hand, now the airplane's airworthy for that one flight. You fly it down, get the annual inspection, and everything's good out there. Okay, so that is a special flight permit. How that works, really super easy. Just call your local FSDO and get that special flight permit. All right, now let's talk a little bit about preventative maintenance. 43.3 is where this is at. Now, us as pilots, we can do quite a bit of maintenance on these airplanes. So pilots are authorized to do many types. That is changing the tires, changing the oil, replacing the battery, servicing the brakes, service landing gear, shock struts. You can add oil or air or both. Replace and clean spark plugs. All right, so there's quite a bit of items that we can do preventative maintenance wise on the aircraft that does not require a mechanic. All right, but anything that requires major work or involves critical components like the flight controls, A and B mechanic must do the work. So think about, if you needed to change alternator belt in a 172 mic, you have to pull the prop off to do that. So do you think you can go and pull the prop off? No, it's a lot different than pulling a tire off, right? So an A&P mechanic would have to do that work. But however, if you do want to change your own oil, then just go ahead. When a pilot does preventative maintenance, he or she must make a log into the aircraft logbooks, including his or her signature, pilot certificate number, and the work performed. So put that in the logbook. And remember, the airplane is made up of different, basically 3 components, right? So you're going to have a prop log, you're going to have a power plant logbook, and you're going to have an airframe log. So if you're changing the oil, go to the engine log or the power plant log and make that in there, okay? Or if you're changing a tire, that's the airframe, so go to the airframe log, put that in there, okay? So that's the preventative maintenance, quite a bit of what we can do there. All right, let's talk a little bit about required equipment. So we're going to get into switch gears here a little bit. We're going to talk about what do we do if we get to the airplane and certain equipment is not operating. So what kind of required equipment do we have to have to legally fly? All right, so 91205 here lists all the day VFR. There are acronyms to remember this. I can't, I'm too stupid to remember all that. But you can look up 91205, you can find that, or if you've printed off this slide, here it is right here. Airspeed indicator you have to have, tachometer, oil pressure gauge, magnetic compass, altimeter, oil temperature gauge if it's an air-cooled engine. Most all engines are air-cooled. Fuel quantity indicator, ELT if required by 91207. We talked about that. It's not always required. Seatbelt, anti-collision light if it was manufactured after 1996. Manifold pressure gauge, each altitude, engine landing gear position indicator if you have retractable landing gear. So that's 91205. Same thing for nighttime. It's all of the daytime plus you need, if you have fuses in your aircraft, 3 of a kind or full set. You need a landing light only if for hire. So we talked about, if your airplane requires a 100-hour inspection or if you're flying it for hire. So if you're just renting your airplane at night, technically, it doesn't have to have a landing light. But if you're providing flight instruction in the aircraft that you also own, that would be for hire. So landing light would be required at night. Anti-collision light, so that is basically your beacon light is required at night. Position lights are also required at night. That's your navigation lights, sunset to sunrise, just like a boat. And then source of battery, so source of power. For example, a battery there would be required, 91205 at night. Now, what do we do if we have inoperative equipment? So in 91213 here, the FAA gives us a procedure or a way to fly with inoperative equipment. Okay, so this is what we're going to outline right here. So this is a procedure for determining if an aircraft is legal to fly with inoperative equipment. So if you can answer yes to the following questions, the aircraft is not legal to fly. So is the atom a structural component of the aircraft, like a wing, strut, flight control, or etc.? Right? It's like, yeah, we're not going to be flying. No. Okay, we're done. Is the atom listed in the type certificate data sheet as required for the aircraft? This is a big one. I'm going to show you in just a second where we get that. Here's a link here in the dynamic regulatory system. And I'm going to show you how we look up that type certificate data sheet. This is the big one. But also, if it's required by an STC. So what is an STC? STC is a supplemental type certificate. So it's basically a modification to the type certificate data sheet. And what is a type certificate data sheet? So the type certificate data sheet, when the manufacturer makes an airplane, all right, then the FAA will issue, once it gets its airworthiness certificate, the FAA will issue a type certificate data sheet. So it basically, we'll look at it in just a second. It breaks down what engine you have, what prop you have, the limitations, fuel limitations. It will have like a weight and balance arm and the weight and balance envelope limitations and all that. And it's basically how this airplane was certified. So you cannot change anything about that. If you want to put in a different engine, sorry, you can't change it. If it's not in the type certificate data sheet, then you cannot change it unless you go through the process with the FAA, all the testing process, and then the FAA would issue you an STC, a supplemental type certificate. So that's why if you're flying an aircraft and it's got, big souped up engine, then you're going to have an STC that you operate, which is a supplemental type certificate. It's a supplement to the type certificate data sheet. So you would use the STC power limitations and whatever that would supersede the type certificate data sheet. But that's kind of how that works. We'll look at that in just a second once we get done with this. Is the item required by an airworthiness directive? We just talked about AD, so you would have to know all the specific ADs for your aircraft. Is the item required by an MEL? So what is an MEL? MEL is a minimum equipment list, and so most small general aviation aircraft do not have an MEL. I will just say all small general aviation aircraft don't have an MEL. A MEL, so I fly private jet for a living, we do have an MEL, minimum equipment list, and that's what we use when we have inoperative equipment. Okay, we don't have to go through all of this here because we just go straight to the MEL. It is FAA approved, and so if XYZ is not working, we go to that. It'll tell us, hey, you have 4 of those. One of those is required to be working to dispatch, or it'll say, check this if this, and this is working, then you can dispatch, and you have, 6 days to get it fixed, or blah blah blah. We just operate via the MEL. It's all good, but the FAA has to prove this. The FAA does not have the resources to sit there and approve an MEL for every single engine airplane. So what they give us is they give us 91-213. That's our MEL, if you will. That's how we operate with inoperative equipment. So go ahead and strike this one right here. You're not going to have an MEL. Is the item listed in 91-205? We just looked at that for day VFR, okay? If it's one of those items, if it's the airspeed indicator, you're done. You cannot fly. Is the item required by the kinds of operation equipment list? All right. Now, our airplane does not have a kinds of operation equipment list. However, it does have an equipment list. Now, what's the difference? The newer airplanes have a kinds of operation equipment list. All right. Now, it's going to be, usually it's in the limitations section of your AFM. So if you've got a fairly new, 172 or fairly new airplane, go look at the AFM, the approved flight manual. Look up the limitations. You can find the kinds of operation equipment list. Really nice and easy. It's kind of like our MEL with the jet, but really nice and easy. It tells you how much you have, or what you have, and what you can and can't fly. But it breaks it down based upon the kinds of operations that the airplane was certified. So if your airplane was certified for day VFR, night VFR, day IFR, and night IFR, that's 4 different kinds of operations, okay? So it breaks it down based upon those kinds of operations to say, do you need it? Like there may be something you need, like in a Cirrus, for day VFR, you got 2 alternators. So alternator 2 for day VFR, they're like, no, you don't need that. But for, nighttime VFR, they go, no, you do need that. All right. So it just breaks it down based upon the kinds of operations that you're flying in to whether or not you need that specific piece of equipment to be working. We don't have that. We have it just an equipment list. So it doesn't break it down based upon the kinds of operation. So if it's listed as required in our equipment list, then that means it's required for day VFR, night VFR, day IFR, night IFR. It doesn't give us a breakdown between the kinds of operations that the airplane is certified and whether or not we need it. So it's just an all-encompassing equipment list, which means we have to have it. Okay, and then last, does it affect the safety of flight? Now, if you can answer no to all these questions, the piece of equipment must be removed or deactivated, and stick you an INOP sticker on there. Okay, now let's go through basically the type certificate data sheet right here. So this is important. So the first kind of step is it structural component, aircraft wing, whatever, right? Is it listed in the type certificate data sheet? So we're going to click here on the dynamic regulatory system, bring it to you. I'm going to show you how to do this. So we're going to be looking up the type certificate data sheet here. So we're going to go to type certificate holder. We're going to put in Textron here. There's Textron Aviation because we're looking up the 172 Mike model. We're going to go over here to model, and there's the 172, and there's the 172 Mike, and we're just going to hit apply, and come down here, it gives us type certificate data sheet number 3A12. We're just going to click that. And if you look right here in the box, it gives it all of the model numbers that is applicable there. So we're going to scroll down to get to the mic model. So let's just rock on along here. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, so I'm just going to really quick here show you this airplane. The mic model was approved May 12th of 1972. Here's the engine. It has a Lycoming 0320 E2D engine. Fuel limits 80, 87 minimum grade gasoline. Engine limits for all operations 2,700 max RPM, 150 horsepower. Here is the propeller that was certified, all the different props it was certified with. Here is airspeed limitations. So it does break it down miles per hour, and then about halfway through the mic model, it did not. So it breaks it down by serial number specific right there. So starting out serial number 172-65685 and on, it swapped to knots. Here's your CG range. So normal category, utility category, this airplane is certified in, and there are your envelope CG. Now remember, that's going to be performance limitations, where you can see what that CG means. That's basically just ARM, which is after the datum point, or inches after the datum point. Maximum weight right here. So normal category 2,300 pounds, utility category 2,000 pounds. Number of seats 4. That's showing you the arm of the front seats. Here's the maximum baggage, 120 pounds. At 95, there's the arm. Fuel capacity, oil capacity, surface control movements, how high or low the controls. And then this is the eligibility of the serial number. And then you come down here, okay, there's the end model, and it'll go the newer. Now, if you scroll all the way down here, you're going to get to something where it says data pertinent to all models. All right. And we're going to come down here until it says right here, you see where it says equipment. All right. This is where you're going to determine what equipment is required by the type certificate data sheet. So just scroll all the way down, find data pertinent to all models, find equipment. Here you go, okay? So if you read it right here, basic required equipment as prescribed in the applicable airworthiness requirements must be installed in the aircraft. The equipment must include a current AFM, effective serial number 172-71035 and on, okay? We're going to talk about AFM in just a little bit, but how do you know if your airplane is required to have an AFM? Hello, required equipment here on the type certificate data sheet. If you look right here, so the 172H and on, that's going to be us, right? Because we're a mic model. The only thing that's required is the stall warning indicator. So we had to go all the way over here just to figure out that the only thing required is the stall warning indicator. All right. So, recommend for whatever aircraft you're flying, look up the type certificate data sheet. If you want to know the weights for a 747, any certified airplane out there has a type certificate data sheet. All right, so it's really a treasure trove of information. So absolutely, whatever airplane you're flying, go find the type certificate data sheet, print the type certificate data sheet, and it will basically give you limitations, how that airplane was certified. So a lot of good information right there. So I'm going to go back now that we've found what's required by the type certificate data sheet. Then we're going to come on and, is it an AD? Is it required by MEL? We don't have one. Is it 91205? That's self-explanatory. And then kinds of operation equipment list. So for the co-field aviation students, that equipment, if that equipment list, you go to the student section, go all the way down to aircraft documents. Here's our equipment list right here. So it's pretty simple how you would work through this. R means it's a required item for FAA certification. So let's just say if it was the alternator, like if you look right here, there's an R, so it's required. So you cannot take off if your alternator is not working. You would just rock right through here. Pretty self-explanatory. If it has an R, it's required equipment. And again, all that is listed on the website. All right, let's go back to the airworthiness requirements. So basically, it just made up a checklist for just the 172 mic for our students. So here's what you're doing: 91.213 if you go to the airplane and something is not working. So for our airplane 1, is it required by a type certificate data sheet? The stall warning indicator is all that's required equipment listed in the type certificate data sheet. Is it required by 91.205 for day or night? All right, look up that reg. Is it required by an AD? All right, so nothing as of now. Right now that's required for the AD for our 172 mic. They're just all been one-time ADs. We only have 2 recurring ADs that we talked about on our 172. Is it required on the equipment list? So that is in the blue folder in our aircraft specifically. It's also on the website that I just showed you there. If no is the answer, then it can be deactivated and placarded inoperative. All right, it can also be removed, and you would have to update the weight and balance, which would be if you saw that equipment list that had arms and weights, so you would just take that off of the weight and balance. So that is 91.213 operating with inoperative equipment. So that finishes up the airworthiness requirements. All right, so we only got through 1. However, all this other stuff is really fast and easy. The R is the registration certificate. So the registration certificate is now valid for 7 years. Basically provides information on the register's owner of the aircraft and his or her address. The other R, we talked about the radio station license, is FCC regulations, not an FAA one. It's not required for domestic flight, only required for international. It's valid for 10 years. And the pilot must also have a license to operate the radio in a foreign country. And that was that pilot qualifications where we talked about the radio telephone operator's permit. That one never expires. Over here on the owner's manual, okay, so that is the O of the Aero documents. So for aircraft manufactured after March 1st of 1979, approved flight manual must be on board the aircraft. But guess what? Where do we find the required equipment type certificate data sheet, right? So look up type certificate data sheet for your airplane, scroll down to data pertinent for all models, go to equipment, and voila, it'll tell you if an AFM is required equipment. For our 172 mic model, is manufactured in 1975. We just looked that up in the type certificate data sheet. AFM is not required. So just the old school pilot's operating handbook is what was required. Back in the day, in 1975, Cessna just issued an owner's manual, just like you would get in your car. The FAA didn't put their stamp of approval, but starting in 1979, the FAA was basically like, oh wait, whoa. Now we have to have an approved flight manual. So we put our stamp of approval. Now, an approved flight manual is a lot better though, because it's a living, breathing document, meaning it has to be kept up to date. The manufacturer will issue, updates, revisions to the flight manual. And so it's a living, breathing document. So when the manufacturer issues an update, if you don't update the AFM, then the the AFM, the approved flight manual, is out of date, which makes the airplane unairworthy. So in 1975, the 172 we don't have an AFM, we only have a POH, and it's never updated. All right, but if you're flying a newer aircraft, you likely are. If you're flying a newer aircraft, you'll have an AFM. Make sure it has the latest revisions. You can go to Textron's website and see all of those revisions. Make sure you have. If you don't have it, then you can buy a new AFM, a fully updated AFM from your manufacturer. So owner's manual is a big one for the newer aircraft. AFM, look up in the type certificate data sheet to determine if AFM is required. All right, data pertinent to all models. Last one is the W, weight and balance. So it's the actual empty weight and moment and center of gravity for your aircraft. It is aircraft specific. should be signed off by an A&P mechanic, all right? Now, the weight and balance manual is a different thing. The weight and balance manual is located in the AFM or the POH or the owner's manual, all right? It's how it walks you through how to do a weight and balance calculation, which is done in performance and limitations video that I have on the site. All weights, arms, and center of gravity envelopes can also be found in the type certificate data sheet. So I actually want to show you that right there, because I've already showed that to you on the type certificate data sheet. So basically, you can do a whole weight and balance just by the type certificate data sheet. If you remember, or if you scroll back the video a little bit to where I was talking about type certificate data sheet, I was pointing out all of the different arms. And also in data pertinent to all models, it shows where your datum point is. So if your owner's manual doesn't, or the weight and balance manual doesn't show where the datum point is, that's shown on the type certificate data sheet. So if you're getting my drift here, the type certificate data sheet is super important. Look it up, print it off for your airplane. It's well worth it. All right, last here, records that you have to keep. So all inspections must be logged in the following logbooks. We've already talked about this: the airframe, the engine, and the prop logs. So aircraft logs are not required to be carried on board the aircraft. This is a big one. It's the owner's responsibility to comply with all the required inspections in the ADs. However, this is on you. It's pilot and command's responsibility to ensure inspections are done and that the aircraft is airworthy. So make sure you're looking at the airplane logbooks, making sure the AV8s are all done, annual, VOR if required for IFR, the 100-hour inspection if for hire, the altimeter pedostatic check, the transponder check, the ELT check. It is on you to make sure that is. And the big one, huge one, airworthiness directives. So look up the ADs for that aircraft. Look up the list of ADs that have been complied with. It is your responsibility as pilot in command to ensure that's all been done. Sign up for the emails on the FAA website and look them up. So, all right. So that is basically all for the airworthiness requirements, right? So please comment if you got any questions on that, like, subscribe, or whatever. I appreciate you watching this video, and stick around for more. Thanks.